Hi, everyone. Welcome to our chat. My name is Dana Kelley, and I'm a violist in Orpheus. Today, I'm joined by pianist and composer Courtney Bryan, who will be writing a piece for us to perform with Branford Marsalis next season. Courtney is known for combining a wide range of music in her compositions, from jazz to traditional gospel and experimental music. We at Orpheus are very excited to have the opportunity to work with Courtney for this upcoming project and to get to know her more closely through the process. So Courtney, let's get to know you. Where are you coming from? Where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm here in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Nice. And that's where you grew up, right?
Yes, so I grew up in New Orleans. I grew up here. I left for school. Undergraduate, I went to Oberlin Conservatory and then Rutgers University, and then I worked on my doctorate at Columbia University. And I was away until I started a position teaching at Tulane University 4 years ago now, or almost 4 years ago. So that's when I moved back home to New Orleans.
Nice. Do you like being back? You
It's
enjoy
good. And my whole family's here, so it's been really. I used to visit all the time, but now I'm mainly here. So when I travel, I travel for performances, but I like being based in New Orleans, and it's been really nice.
That's great. It must be nice to be close to family and also be able to do your job there. It's really great.
Yeah.
So obviously, a lot of composers are products of their environment, and New Orleans has a very specific environment. And I was just wondering when you realized growing up that you wanted to be a composer and how New Orleans influenced your compositional ideas and process.
hmm Well, that's a great question. As you mentioned, New Orleans is very specific. It's diverse within that, but it's also very specific. Like you realize when you leave New Orleans how different it is from everywhere else you go. So I'm really happy that I grew up in New Orleans, and I was inspired by a lot of different type of music in New Orleans. I had so many great teachers, so won't name all of them, but I had so many great teachers, and one of my teachers was Dr. Daniel Wildbacker, and also Dean Curtis was an early teacher, and I studied classical piano with them throughout my childhood, different points, and I studied with Moses Hogan piano. And then I learned about him as a arranger of spirituals later. And so I became very inspired by that kind of after the fact, but I got to study piano with him. I studied with Ellis Marsalis briefly, but very intense lessons for a short time. But then over time, he was also a mentor to me. I had a teacher named Clyde Kerr Jr. at the New Orleans Center for the Creative Arts, who was a big influence on me. And I went to this camp called Louis Satchmo Armstrong Summer Jazz Camp that's headed by Jackie Harris and Edward Kidd Jordan. That had a very profound impact on me. It's when I started performing jazz. It was right before high school or beginning of high school. And so I went to this camp and I met a lot of people there who are still my collaborators today. We've all grown up together, and that's when I started playing jazz. So ever since then, I've been always doing jazz and classical as a focus. And throughout my life, I've played in churches. So I started off with my home church in New Orleans, which is St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And so I grew up playing in church. My first time being paid to play music was actually at my church, because I would sub as a, in junior high, I would sub for the organist. And so that was quite an experience where I learned that this thing I just love to do anyway was something that also you could make money doing. So I would say my professional career actually started in the church. So that's some of the influences as far as my teachers in jazz and classical, but also just being in New Orleans, you hear music all the time. You hear the brass bands, and you hear, there's a lot of the music on the street and the music on the stages and all the festivals that are going on throughout the year. I had experience playing in jazz clubs as a high school student that I probably shouldn't have been allowed in, but they would let us perform. And so I had professional experience from early on as far as like playing in those sort of venues. So yeah, I don't know. That's just some of the influence of growing up in New Orleans. But also we have a certain approach with all the different styles of music, even between me and my friends, we all kind of have this same approach to like everybody. It's really big emphasis from a lot of the teachers we had on finding our own sound. So there's no like one sound that we, like all of us who went to the Satchmo Jazz Camp, we all, like some of my friends, there's Christian Scott, Atunda Ajua, Sammy Williams, known as Big Sam, Troy Andrews, known as Trombone Shorty. There's all these musicians that we were there at the same time, and we've done different types of things, but we all had the same training and same kind of like approach to learning and also to teaching music.
Yeah, that is very cool and very unique. Definitely, I can say growing up where I did, which is kind of the middle of nowhere, upstate New York, it was not like that at all. And I imagine that you carry those experiences with you throughout, you know, every different opportunity that arises in every different place that you've been. I know you've traveled a lot and lived in a lot of different cities, and, you know, nothing compares, but I imagine that those memories are always there and always influencing your process. I remember I went to New Orleans twice. I've been twice before. And just being in the French Quarter and seeing people just walking around with, you know, trumpets and there's just music all the time, not only in the bars and in the restaurants, but just people are out making music, and it was so cool. So I imagine growing up with that all the time totally makes you into a really interesting and unique composer while also studying classical music. It must be, I think you're very cool is what I'm trying to say. That's awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I feel very, I'm very happy about having that experience early on.
Yeah. So you're back in New Orleans, not only because you work there, but you were not originally supposed to be there at this time, right? The pandemic kind of brought you back. And I was wondering how COVID-19 has affected any projects you're working on, including ours, but other things you have in motion, and if it has affected your process at all.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for mentioning that. This year, I was awarded the Rome Prize, and so I was at the American Academy of Rome, which was scheduled to be from the beginning of September of last year until the end of July this year. So I was traveling. I had two performances in the States, and I was really excited. I was very into my projects, so I'll mention what those are. But I was very into my projects. I had just given a talk at the Academy on March 2nd. When I was leaving for a few weeks, because I was going to have a premiere of a violin concerto I wrote for Jennifer Cole and the Chicago Sinfonietta. So I had that premiere, and I also had a performance with the LA Phil for their festival. They had a festival with Herbie Hancock and LA Phil, Gustavo Dudamel. So I was really excited about both of these events, and so I was going, and I actually was going between cities. I was going to Chicago and LA, and during that time, things were already bad in northern Italy, but Rome was just like normal when I left. It was just like everything was just normal. But during that time, Rome started to shut down, and so I made my plans to come home to New Orleans, and I was going to come home to New Orleans until it was time to go back to Rome. And so in that time, as we know, a lot of things things happened really quickly. Mm-hmm. So it ended up that I wasn't going to go back to Rome, but also the Academy closed early, and our fellowship ended early as well. And so so I've been home since, and I've been just having, I'm glad to be with my family during this time. It would have been very difficult for me to be across the world, seeing how things are going in the US right now in multiple ways. And also in New Orleans was hit particularly hard by COVID, especially after Mardi Gras, all the folks coming from everywhere to New Orleans. And we didn't know, you know, the local government didn't yet know how bad it was. And so we had Mardi Gras, and yeah, so we were hit really hard, but I'm actually really happy with how the mayor and the governor have handled things in Louisiana and in New Orleans, because we really have, they were pretty aggressive with, us really like getting the curve down. So things have been better at the moment, but as we know, we have to keep watching because there's no vaccine yet.
Right.
And we're still hoping that the federal government will have plans for people that ensure that they have housing and that they have the things they need to survive. So we're still kind of, seeing how all of that will come about. So that's my experience so far, just paying attention to everything. As far as my creative process, at first I just kind of put my projects down because I knew that I couldn't think about them at the moment. But in the past month, I've picked up my projects, and I'll just name a few of them. There's an opera that I'm working on, which is called Awakening. It's with the International Contemporary Ensemble, and other collaborators are director Charlotte Brathwaite, vocalist, musician Helga Davis, artist Colleen Smith, poet Sharon Strange, and two dramaturgs, Dr. Matthew Morrison and Sundar Ganglani. So that's one project. And another project is one that I worked on in December. I came home to New Orleans and I did a recording in the studio called Sounds of Freedom. So musicians on that are drummer Joe Dyson, bassist Brian Kazare, saxophonist Stephen Gladney, and also special guest saxophonist Calvin Johnson, Carrie Allen Lee, trumpeter Kevin Lewis, and poet Chuck Perkins. So we did a project that I'm working on with that one, Sounds of Freedom. And there's a project that I'm doing with artist Tiona McCloudon called the Black Americana Epic. So that's going to take place in Philadelphia. That was postponed due to COVID, but we're still working on that. And it's inspired by a collaboration that was done by Langston Hughes and Florence Price. Oh, cool. And so these are all three projects that I'm still working on, and I'm coming back to them now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. It sounds like you got a lot going on. I'm glad that you're able to continue the work on them, even though things are paused. In terms of the piece you're writing for Orpheus, it's based on themes from the opera Carmen. And I was wondering, since you are familiar with the Marsalis family, how your process is influenced by working with someone which is something that it sounds like you commonly do, but also with a group that you're less familiar, because we haven't worked together, Orpheus and you, and if that at all changes your approach to writing, or if you have an idea that you want to make work and then you kind of make the pieces come together rather than fishing around, because I know some composers first like to know the group and then write, and then others just are like, this is what it's going to be. So I'm just curious how it works for you in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I like that question because it is different ways of working when you know the performers personally, like you've got a chance to sit down at meals and just talk about non-music things, and you just have like an idea of their personality, and also musically if you work together and what their process is, like, oh, I like to start with this and then go to that. So that can create a certain kind of work, like what I did in my recording, where the musicians, I've worked with them forever, or we grew up together. But I do a lot of projects where it is like, here's the instrumentation, and it's a group, and it's so, say with orchestras, sometimes it's a city that I may or may not have been to before. Mm-hmm. But it's I'm writing for them, and it's more thinking about the instruments, but I have a way to make things personal for me. It might be the material that's the inspiration, or there's something that I have to have that's a personal attachment, and then I can think about, write for instruments. With this project, it's exciting. So I mentioned that I knew Ellis Marsalis, and I know Jason Marsalis, drummer. Jason Marsalis, but the other Marsalis, but I don't know Branford Marsalis yet. So it's really exciting. But of course, I grew up listening to his music and just familiar with his sound. In fact, sometimes when I didn't know it was him, like I remember when I wanted to study jazz, one of the albums that I knew about, or the music I knew about, was from Spike Lee's movie Mo Better Blues. Mm. And I remember thinking, oh, good, I'll get to learn that song, Mo Better Blues. It goes, da 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 da. Anyway, I would like teach myself that. So I didn't even know till I was older that that was the Branford Marsalis group and that that was his music. But I always knew about Branford Marsalis, and he's such a amazing artist. Like he's one of those people you can't put into one category or not even two or three. You know, he's done so much over his career and continues to. So like whether it's in the jazz context or the classical orchestral context or popular musics of different types. He's been everywhere. He's an actor. It was like sometimes I forget how many movies he's been in. So he's an actor, and then he's he's an educator, and like especially we see all these documentaries and hear his voice on the music. So anyway, working with him is going to be exciting, but it's also a new experience. And working with Orpheus Chamber Orchestra is really exciting, just because of the whole interesting model of the orchestra, the idea of it being a conductorless orchestra, and there's all kind of creative opportunities that can come with working with an orchestra like this. I remember when I heard Orpheus perform a piece of Bizet Ayers just a few years ago. I was in New York, and I was just really excited by the whole like approach of the orchestra and then the sound and the energy. So yeah, it's really an honor to work with this orchestra and putting it all together. It's I'm just thinking about all the possibilities at this moment.
Yeah. One big possibility that we kind of talked about before, and I'm curious to share with other people, is that you, in a lot of your compositions, you aim to imitate the feeling of improvisation. And obviously Branford Marsalis can improvise himself. But I was wondering if you had thought about what the possibilities for Orpheus could be in improvisation. Since we are not conducted and since there are fewer members than a traditional symphony orchestra, there could be, some unique ways to incorporate both written and unwritten improvisation, and like having the conversation between Branford and us throughout the piece. So I was just wondering if that's been part of your process, thinking about ways to use that technique.
Yeah, so first of all, I love that idea because we did have a chance to talk briefly, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I will say that at first when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, this is approaching it like a concerto. And so I was like, okay, well, the soloist is Branford Marsalis. So my thing with a concerto, I've only written one. I wrote the one, I should say I've only written one. I've written one, and it was for Jennifer Cole and Chicago Sinfonietta. So that was just recently. So I still have my mind in concerto mode. Like the idea for me is that's so exciting is there's this amazing musician, and you can think about all the things that are possible to highlight the things that they do that are unique to them. And so, so with Branford Marsalis, I was thinking of that, between him being an interpreter and him being an improviser, and just trying to, have all kind of creative ways to really just highlight Branford Marsalis. But I'm glad you mentioned that with Orpheus, because at first I was thinking, okay, and then we have the orchestra, but there is a more creative way to approach the orchestra as far as improvisation. And so I don't know exactly the ways I'm going to do that yet, but there's conversations that go back a few years ago. I did this workshop. My advisor at Columbia was George Lewis, and he was involved, or he told me about this opportunity, and I did this workshop with the Jazz Composers Orchestra Institute that's through American Composers Orchestra's Earshot program. So we did this workshop at UCLA, and it was all about improvisation and the orchestra. Part of it was us learning technical things like things to consider right for orchestra. And this is before I did my first orchestra reading some years ago. But we did the workshop. Part of it was practical learning about the instruments, how they work, and other parts were kind of like studying different literature that has that theme of improvisation in the orchestra. And another was just kind of having discussions openly about improvisation in orchestra, like what ways to approach it. I mean, one way is to have musicians improvise. Another way is what I've been doing, where I have everything notated if it's non-improvisers, but I wanted to have the feeling of improvisation. But yeah, I'm trying to think of different ways I want to do things. So yeah, if it's something kind of in between, you know, like where, I should say in between, but like if there's something in between the fully notated music I would do like for, that I say I did for Jacksonville Symphony versus the recording I did in December where I purposely had no music written down. We discussed different words and then we did free improvisation in the studio. So my thing working with Orpheus and Branford Marsalis could be somewhere in the middle of that. And so that's really exciting. So I'm still brainstorming.
That is exciting. It's exciting for me. Think about that because I've never had the opportunity as part of an ensemble to do some improv, and I feel like it could really, I don't even know what I feel actually. I just think it's cool, the possibility, and working with both you and Branford who do this more regularly than, you know, the typical classical musician who's just so used to just reading the notes and playing it, and that's that. So yeah, there's a lot, and I hope it's kind of uncomfortable for us. I think it'll be good to stretch the limits of what an orchestra can do, and who knows, it could turn into like a whole movement or something. Let's change the world. No. Another kind of improvisatory leap that you're taking with this is that you are using Carmen, and instead of having her die at the end of this opera, in your version, she lives and she's the hero. And I was wondering why you made that choice and how you see that playing out musically in the composition.
Okay, yeah. So I remember when I first had the conversation about doing this piece, and I was excited that it was based on Carmen because that's a piece that I just love. I mean, I was thinking about how in opera like Carmen themes are so much part of our culture that even before you know what it's from, you know it. Like, you know, the habanera theme and the toreador theme and just these different themes from the opera. They're part of our like popular culture. And then my introduction to Carmen was actually, the first time I watched all of Carmen was actually through the movie Carmen Jones.
Okay.
Which is a remake of the opera as a film, but with Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte. And so I had that as and I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. I watch it a lot. So that was my like watching the whole film. And then I went to the original opera itself, the Bizet opera, and I've seen different productions over time on film. I still haven't seen it live yet, but I'm sure that'll be easy to do because it's performed a lot. So what I've been doing, one thing that with a lot of my favorite operas, the women die at the end, and and I know it's just, you know, and I know that they were written a while ago, and I know that has like a dramatic quality to it, that she dies at the end. But my thing with, if I were going to do the project, I really wanted her to live and win. And so I guess I don't know exactly how that comes about. And I was starting to read more recently. So I'm trying to learn about what people have done in different productions. But as far as full productions of Carmen, more recently I've heard about people changing the ending or taking more creative liberty with that, where she lives, one where she kills him, but Don Jose. And that's one solution, but that's not what I'm having in mind. But yeah, there's just different ways to explore, like taking creative license with an ending. And part of the liberty that we have in this particular case is that we're not creating a whole opera with a plot. It's themes from the opera. So for me, it's actually more, it's more of my own inspiration, that I picture a Carmen that I don't know how it is that she lives and wins. I don't know if it's like a supernatural force that saves her, or if she, or if there are like proper things in place in society that actually like help women or people in general who are dealing with domestic violence. Like maybe there's more in place where she has somewhere to go that, you know, so I don't know, it could be any number of things, but for me, it's a good inspiration that in some way or another, she's not the victim. And another perspective, because I was talking with a collaborator of mine, Janina Burnett, who's a wonderful vocalist, and she's played Carmen on stage, and she was describing how Carmen is already a hero in the original context. I mean, depending on how you read it, like she's someone who doesn't give in. She's a free person, and she'd rather stick with her freedom even if she's killed for it. So there's all kind of ways to interpret how she could win or thrive, but to me it was important that she's not a victim of, and that we romanticize her being a victim of this situation.
That's really great. And it is interesting that I didn't know that some companies were already reimagining the ending. And it's interesting to think about an opera like that in the year 2020.
Yeah.
And how the story would be totally different today if it were written today. Even if, a lot of the actions were the same, the ending would definitely be different because society's different and, norms change and what is acceptable and what is unacceptable changes through time. And you often, in most of your compositions, you are kind of blending music of the past with music of the present, and you definitely don't shy away from highlighting certain social issues. And I know that your project with ICE is one where you are definitely not shying away from societal issues. And I was just wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about that and why you think it's important to make a project like that.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So there's so yeah, with the domestic violence thing, it's true we have come a long way as far as from that time period, but it is one of those issues where it's like there's still it's still shocking to me when I read the numbers of women who and I'm focusing on women, but people of domestic violence, victims of domestic violence, how there's still a lot more that needs to be done. But my project with ICE, I'm very excited. It's an opera called Awakening. And I mentioned the collaborators earlier. We're all in conversations regularly, and where the storyline of it is there's a contemporary imagined woman who is in an oppressive situation, and she transforms out of the situation with the help of three Black women from the past, which are Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and a Black Shaker Eldridge known as Rebecca Cox Jackson. So these three women from the past were really doing a lot of like learning about them. Rebecca Cox Jackson was born free in Philadelphia in the late 18th century. They're all around the same time as far as like early 19th century, like a lot of the history they were doing, but they're all different stories from each other. But Rebecca Cox Jackson, who's the least known, she was a free Black person who was born in Philadelphia, and she left her husband and brother, and they were big into the AME Church, which was the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was very important for Black people during that time, starting their own churches. She left and joined a Shaker community, a white Shaker community in upstate New York, and she really found her calling there. And then she eventually left that and came back to Philadelphia and started a Black Shaker community. So her story is just very fascinating. We've all been discussing and learning more about her. And Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, freedom fighters and abolitionists. So that's that project. And what's happening right now is we're also discussing what's going on right now with Black Lives Matter and the various protests that are happening to protest police brutality, but also a lot of the other institutionalized racism that's been killing us. So not only affecting us in negative ways, but has been killing us for all this time. And so this is a really powerful moment. It's a moment, and just seeing how the youth in general, I know it's generations of people coming together, but the youth are really like leading, and just how they're, it's like a powerful moment where people are standing up and the youth are really trying to stop this from continuing. I mean, it's been generations and generations fighting the same things, and things get better, but then they go back, and so this moment is very powerful. So what's happening is that this moment is also a part of us talking about, like, we're through Harriet Tubman's Sojourner Truth and Rebecca Cox Jackson, we're able to approach what's happening right now and then do that through our art.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very intense process right now, but it's also a very life-giving process to have art to process what's going on right now. And that's as far as like us planning the project itself, but also while we're doing the process of the project, we're trying to discuss ways that our process can be helpful in very tangible ways with the movement. So that's where we are right now with that.
And when did you start that project?
We started, conversations actually started a couple of years ago. So sometimes I get surprised. It started a couple of years ago with Ross Carr from International Contemporary Ensemble. We talked about doing something together. And he asked me, what are your dreams though? And I was like, oh, because at first I was like, oh, well, we could do this or we could do that. Like, usually I'm used to thinking, okay, what's the instrumentation? What's the duration? And then I think about what's possible from there. But he told me to like think about what are my dreams. I was like, wow, I want to write an opera one day. So that was some years ago. I don't even know what year, but it became more of a reality when I met Larry and Arlene Dunn. They're a couple. They live in Oberlin, Ohio, and they're at every new music event throughout the country. Like if you go to you see them, and they have been supporting International Contemporary Ensemble on different projects. And so I met them while I was at the Ohio Music Festival. There was a performance of a piece that Sharon Strange and I wrote along with Helga Davis that was written as a tribute to Sandra Bland. So we had premiered it in 2016 with the Dream Unfinished and Activist Orchestra in New York. And then this year we did 2017 we did a chamber version invited by Bizet Iyer to the Ohio Music Festival in California. So we had we did this piece called Yet Unheard in the chamber version with ICE. And Larry and Arlene, we met there. So they decided they were going to help support this project that we're doing. And then from there, we've been getting more and more support. And so it's projected to premiere in Philadelphia, possibly fall of 2021. So we're all in conversations about that right now.
That's cool. It's interesting how this idea, I mean, right now, obviously we're going through this moment in our country where once again, we're fighting the same battles we've been fighting for hundreds of years. And this time seems to be the biggest in recent memory. And yet you started writing or started, dreaming about this project in a time when, things were calmer. And it's like, okay, we're back. And it's just like art is so important in highlighting these issues and making sure that we don't ignore or forget people in our past who've done so much to get us to where we are, and what we can do as artists to continue that fight. And it's really powerful to hear that a composer like you is really interested in making this happen and making this part of our consciousness, and not letting people forget that all these people in the past worked so hard. And it's like, we can't just say, oh yeah, they did it before and everything's fine now, because it's clearly not. We're dealing right now with the pandemic of COVID-19. We're dealing with police brutality. We're dealing with just the highlighting of all the inequities we have in this country, just all at once. And it's overwhelming. But it's interesting sitting here talking to you, because we're two African-American women who exist in a largely Eurocentric and largely white supremacy-based art form in classical music. And yet we're sitting here talking about making classical music. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, how we can remain, committed to this art form that we've grown to love, but also recognize where we've been shut out historically, and what we can do to make sure that doesn't continue, and make sure that there are opportunities for people like us to make art and for it to be heard, not only just, making it, but that it's promoted and that orchestras are playing it, and, that not only orchestras are playing it, but it's being played on the biggest stages around the world, and people are aware, and there's a support for it. And I guess my experience, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but my experience has been that, like you were saying, most of the impetus for this stuff is coming from young people with a few older, maybe wealthier patrons who recognize the importance, but it's not in the mainstream. It's not happening as much in these institutions with longer histories, institutions that are more used to being less experimental with their programming or something like that. And I was wondering, number one, if you feel the same way about that, and if so, what do you think the responsibility of these larger institutions are to fighting this fight, and what they can actually do in times of crisis, and looking forward to, making sure that this is a sustainable thing, what they can do to make that a reality?
Yeah, these are important things to think about. It's kind of like, it's a big looking in the mirror moment for the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, even though COVID is something happening around the world, like there's the part of it that is a virus, but then a lot of what's come up for us in the US is that we've had a big look in the mirror, and it's not been pretty, about the way United States has been, like the systems that we have in place and the ones that we don't have in place. So there's overall, like, the whole problem we have with our healthcare system,
Mm-hmm.
and there not being a focus on public health, and just the idea that you can have a job and be able to go to the doctor, then you can lose your job one day because of whatever random cause, and then you can't go to the doctor. And the combination of that, like not having universal health care, there's all these things, but then there's also like a chance to look in the mirror individually, and then also with the institutions we're a part of. And so that part has been interesting for me, because I think my first thoughts during this time has been like, kind of like the larger things about the US, but also just me being concerned, like, about how are people going to have somewhere to live and to eat. And so it's really it's really at that point, because it's like right now it's bad, but also what's coming up is like, because people talk about come August, some of these things that have been in place to tide things over and suspend rent or different things are gonna go past, and then we like, what's gonna happen then? So it's been some of that, but it is a moment to think about the institutions, and within our music communities, there's people have been either speaking or not speaking, and so it's great when institutions that are these predominantly white institutions have been making a point to declare Black Lives Matter, which is important. And so some of those institutions can sort of speak to things they've been doing before this moment to increasing diversity, or to valuing, I'm just talking within music, like valuing Black musicians, and valuing by paying and employing, and things like that. So there are those who can speak to what they've done already and what they plan to do, and there are others who maybe haven't done enough before. But I think in saying Black Lives Matter, then it's the positive side is that it's a commitment to try to find what they can do better. And then there are those who are silent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the silence is not right, because there's people who feel like, oh, I don't know what to say, so I'll be silent. But silence is read as being complicit. If you're silent, you're not taking a side. It means you're not supporting Black Lives Matter. But I think for those who are trying to figure out what they can do, I mean, I think it's good to, hopefully there could be more conversations between those who have been doing this work. Like, there's all the organizations that have been doing this work, and I should name some, and I probably missed a lot of them, but like there's the American Composers Forum and New Music USA, and different organizations that have been trying to confront these issues and about inequality, racial inequality in music. And so I think those organizations and all the ones that I don't know about, or maybe that I know about and I haven't named just now, those other major organizations should really be in touch with them and aggressively try to find out, you know, what they can do to even the playing field, you know, in this music. And that's as far as performers, that's as far as composers being commissioned, and also like maybe it has to do with board members or whoever is behind the scenes making decisions. A lot of the opportunities that I've gotten, there's been either someone who is Black who's in a position of power, or there's someone who cares about that. Like they might be white, but they have a mission of noticing and seeing Black people. Because the thing is that we're all around. There's so many of us that are performers, that are composers, and so but there's not an even playing field for programming and for employment. So there's kind of no excuses at this point. And so I think that when people, the institutions who want to do better, I think there's places they can go, and it's not just to individual Black musicians and say, what should I do? Like they should go to the organizations who have been doing this work for many years and just work on it, and like really like be willing to speak up to whatever donors they have that diversity. I think they have to speak up to them because it's time.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I'm hopeful that this is the time that, like you're saying, there's the mirror. It's like really look hard in the mirror and look what you have done, look where you are now, and I'm glad that there are resources to turn to. It doesn't all have to be, oh, it's, you know, what do I have to do? What am I going to do? I don't know enough. Blah, blah. So it's great that you named a few, and I know there are more out there that organizations can turn to for help in this situation, and hopefully continue helping to even the playing field and make it less of an event when there is a person of color, you know. It should just be normal like any other member of an orchestra or on the board or composer or anything like that. So I think those are all the questions I have for you today. I don't want to hold you here too long. Thank you so much for sharing so much with me today. And I think this conversation about Orpheus and the piece we're going to do together that I'm very excited about, and also just like the wider world of music and all the work that you're doing, is really interesting and very exciting. So I'm really looking forward to our chance to collaborate together. And I hope that you stay safe and well in New Orleans, and that we can meet sooner rather than later. Yeah, thanks so much for participating.
Thank you so much, Dana. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm really excited about working with Orpheus. This is really going to be, yeah, I'm just really excited to have this sort of project that it's so important as artists to just keep producing, because, you know, it's like a heavy time, and it's just good to have something that can keep the creativity going, because that's so important. Like we have to keep living, we have to keep producing, and not just for producing's sake, but we have to make creative things out in the world and keep creating beauty. So I'm glad we can do that together.
We do. That was an excellent last sentence. Thank you, Courtney.